Hey guys, welcome to the gun shop, and today we're going to look at what is the best game load. What is the best load for game to kill game efficiently? And as such, we've got the whiteboard out. Before I start, let me tell you a bit about my personal journey, because as we go through the whiteboards and the motions, we will obviously go through my journey of how I got as far as I have. And again, before we really start, I'm going to say I haven't quite figured it out yet. But I'm going to tell you everything I have figured out, and we're going to go from there. The first thing you should know is there is a complete lack of constants with shotgun ballistics. With a rifle, there is a huge amount of constants. You can measure just about everything, and as such you can be almost damn sure where that bullet is going to go. With a shotgun, we really don't have that luxury. However, I'm going to tell you as far as I've got. I'm going to start, we're talking about shot sizes. I think that's probably the best place to start. So as we can see, I've put USA and UK on here for our mixed viewership. We're working off UK shot sizes today. We have the shot size, the shot diameter, the weight in grains, and the ball count. So let's start with our first lack of constants. One manufacturer's 7 isn't necessarily another manufacturer's 7. As such, the diameter in millimeters, these are only related to certain manufacturers. This is not a constant. Because there's no law that says a size 7 shot should be 2.3 mil or a size 6 shot, sorry, should be 2.6 mil, it can actually go up to, you know, there is a variance on that. So we could go plus or minus 0.1 millimeters, but it might be actually 0.2 millimeters. So for example, if you get two 5-shot cartridges from two different manufacturers, open them up, pour them out, those shot could be different sizes. As such, the weight in grains would be different if each alloy was the same, because lead is a shot is not just pure lead, or rarely is it pure lead. There is a lot of other mixtures in there to make it better, which we'll go into later. As such, the weight in grains is again plus minus some. So from the very basics of ballistics, we don't really know what we're working with unless we take one shotgun cartridge, particularly open it up and research exactly how big the balls are on average, because they are not exact, they're not constant. Weigh them all and hope that they're all the same, which they should be, but then the sizes won't be, so we won't. And then work out the ball count accordingly, which will obviously change for the weight in grains, which will change more on the diameter than the weight in grains, although it won't, because if you have a lighter mixture of metal, then you'll get more in 28 grams. We're confused from the start? Good, because I was too. It took me a huge amount of time to get my head around this, let alone what we're going to get into next. So as long as you've got a picture of that pretty much reserved in your head, let's move on. So the first hurdle we cross is the ballistic coefficient of a sphere. There's different calculations depending how fast the sphere is going, and essentially this is the one if it's over 1300 feet per second. So if you shoot Winchester shells or subsonics, you need to do it completely different. However, given that most UK based game shells are over 1300 feet per second, it is weight over diameter times 10640, which leaves us with a BC of 4 shot of blah 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 blah. Whether that's interesting will depend on how your brain works. I only found it interesting because it took me so damn long to find a formula that worked. So the problem with this is it assumes that the spheres that we're using are completely perfect, which they're probably not, and so there you go. There's a huge amount of variance that can happen to the ballistic coefficient. So let's say this is the optimum coefficient. This is the optimum BC of a shot size of these varieties. Is this right here? How exciting is that? So, those being the optimum, let's work out the ballistics of a optimum sphere. So let's say a single shot of 4 coming out of a barrel at a set speed. So let's wipe this off and write up what I found for that. So at 1400 feet per second, muzzle speed, perfect ballistics, and aka coming out like it's coming out of a rifle, a size 4 size shot at 1400 feet per second does this. There's your feet per second, there's your foot pounds, shot 5 feet per second, foot pounds, shot 6, blah blah blah. So here's some real easy ones to determine very quickly. Firstly, the 6 decelerates a little faster than the 4, but not a huge amount. The real difference here is in the foot poundage. As you can see, if they're all leaving at the same speed, The foot poundage at 30 yards for a shot size 4 is 7.2, and in size 6 is a 4.3. You know, it actually almost drops to half, pretty much, which is something, right? So this is where I got to. I thought, you know what, let's chuck it into the ballistic calculator and see what it produces, and it produced me this. What got me thinking was that a 5-shot didn't break a piece of cardboard at 100 meters, so it really did not have 1.7 foot-pounds of energy, and it wasn't going at 625 feet per second, because that would have punched a hole in the paper. Not that I really thought this would be perfect anyway, because there's so many variables, there's no constants. And as such, I took it all out of the ballistic calculator and sat geeking out on paper at home, and decided to add some variables. And as such, I found this, which is about to appear right here. So, the reality 4. This is almost a better case scenario for reality. We haven't actually included all of the constants, mostly because I'm not a ballistician and my maths is poor at best. So, here we have it. To be obviously compared with this top end one here, down to here. Probably should have written them together, that would have made some sense. But let's focus purely on the 50-yarder here. It goes from 965 down to 666, that's a 30% loss, which works out 5.3 foot-pounds down to 2.5 foot-pounds. I mean, and that is 47% loss at 50 yards. In reality, this is more what a 4-shot looks like, but actually this is best case scenario as far as I could work out. In reality, it drops exponentially after about 40 yards. You can watch the power dropping off, and as such, in reality, that's also the effect, and the constants get worse exponentially. So as such, at 100 yards, although it could potentially have 0.63 foot-pounds, it still probably doesn't. So one very small ball hitting you with 0.63 foot-pounds isn't going to do a great deal. That's often why at these sort of 50, 60, 70 yard range, if you're stood under the birds and they're shooting them, you can hear it sort of rattle through the feathers, and you know it's hit the bird, but it doesn't really do anything. It's because it's not carrying any energy. Alright, although the percentages for these you could probably write here, in fact I'm going to write those here. Okay, so now we've got a velocity loss chart. The velocity loss isn't exponential, but the foot poundage kind of is, a little bit more so. So 6, 14, 20, 26, 30, 35, 39, 42, 46 and 49. This is kind of the best case for a 4-shot. The only things I did figure out, although I didn't really go as far as to really get this far, I've roughed out some figures, but I'm not entirely happy presenting them right now. Not that I'm overly happy presenting this, because none of it's constant and none of it is potentially true, that a 6-shot will have a higher percentage loss, significantly at the bottom. You're looking, you know, up to like an 80% loss at 100 yards over what I found originally, which leaves it with pretty much nothing. Hence it is just about capable of denting the paper. Okay, so now we've established that this is true only in perfect scenarios that don't exist, and this is true potentially significantly more than that. However, this is still best case. I'm talking if you hit it with an edge pellet, a pellet on the edge of your pattern that's had some deformation, which obviously will reduce the BC and hence slow it down significantly, will be a fraction of this. You know, let's say at 50 yards it might only have a half foot-pound or a foot-pound, because it's so deformed, it's so slowed down, it's so inefficient. Okay, this being the case, a 4-shot is the best possible scenario for energy retention, purely based on the size more than anything. However, also that the energy that it can transfer is greater, out past the sort of 40 or 50 yard mark. However, we're not talking about hitting a bird just with one ball, are we? And so as such, we're now going to take a little look at something called Payload Delivery. So payload energy is a term that really has no place here, but in this case it means balls times foot-pounds, aka the total energy put on target when you pull the trigger, aka this chart here. So 2 balls of number 4 shot is 10.6 and 2 balls of number 6 shot is 6.2 foot-pounds. It is the total foot-poundage put on the target at range. So here's a little chart here with some magical foot-poundage. These are all done using the foot-pounds from 50 yards of the constant ballistics. So again, you could probably, well, we know we can remove about a minimum of 47% from here, and we could probably move a little more from here, to be honest. So what that means potentially is that if you hit it with 2 balls from number 4, it's going to be significantly more dead than a number 6. However, as we discussed earlier, there are more balls in a 6-shot ounce than a 4-shot ounce. In fact, a 6-shot was 100%. You'd have 58% in a 4 and 75% in a 5, which would mean 24 balls of 6, 18 balls of 5, and 14 balls of 4 if we were to scale it down particularly. As such, here we go. We have the potential average payload versus the meat damage versus the potential vital shot. It is the sort of trinity you're trying to go here. You're trying to hit the bird with enough energy to knock it out of the sky. So you want the balls to have enough energy together to cause enough damage throughout the bird to kill it, without then causing a huge amount of meat damage. I'm not talking about smacking it with the full pattern at 14 yards, versus a potential vital. So it's all about weighing up the potential here, which is why you see a lot of the high bird boys are going for density and power, so they'll be using a 40-gram 4. However, a lot of the low guys will be on an ounce of 6, and they're going to achieve a fairly similar ball count, a fairly similar density, without having a huge amount of payload energy, potentially. So it's about, life is about balance. We're not looking to, it's not Exocet Central here. All of this, therefore, needs to be mixed with your choke. So the best game load is obviously dependent on choke and quarry, which comes to almost the conclusion, which essentially is that it's kind of horses for courses, is probably what we should say here. However, we can't say that, so we're going to have to come up with something a little bit more average, potentially. Before I put a real conclusion on it, I am going to talk about these points here just as some other variables. And I'm also going to point out that actually we did go out in the field and shoot over a chronograph. We cut a hole in a board, put a bit of metal over it, and shot through the chronograph with some 4-shot. And actually my results were lesser than the results I found on the board. From that, I won't take a huge amount away. I mean, it was about 10% less actually, and that was only at 30 yards. I found that quite scary actually, at how little power a single ball could potentially have. And I suppose this might go into this in part 2, is actually go out and show you some field tests, but who knows, we might get there. Starting with speed. Speed kills, or so we're told. Most people, when they shoot a shotgun cartridge, don't really care about the speed, but they care about the recoil, because psychologically that makes them think it's fast, which makes them think they're killing stuff just that little bit better. Does speed kill? Yes, of course it does. A faster ball will have more energy against the same size ball going slower. However, speed can ruin consistency of patterns. Generally, fast cartridge will be a little bit less consistent at the muzzle. Not that it makes a huge difference in lead at the closer ranges. As we've said, that speed will exponentially decrease. So starting faster is good, that's for sure. However, really isn't going to make a huge amount of difference past a certain point, because you have lost so much that we're talking tiny fractions of actual increased speed. A faster cartridge is better. So, in conclusion of speed, a faster cartridge is potentially better, however is also potentially worse, and in reality the difference of 100 feet per second in a game load is neither here nor there. In fact, changing your shot size up a half shot size will give you that energy you're looking for, and your lack of deceleration that you'll get in a smaller, faster shot size more, potentially. Shot is about the biggest variable, whether that is size, ballistic coefficiency, whether it is polished, plated, whether that be in copper or nickel, whether it's got higher antimony content, whether it's harder, whether it deforms more. There is a huge amount of variables with shot. Generally speaking, the better quality shot will decelerate less because it has a higher ballistic coefficiency. And as such, one piece of shot is more likely to bring your game down, but the shot will hit harder on target. Wad. Plastic wads are better, generally speaking, especially the sealed ones, because they will hold your shot as a ball together for longer. Whether that is 1 yard, 2 yards, or 3 yards, that is 3 yards extra before you start that deceleration of a single piece of shot all alone. It's the whole bundle of sticks versus a twig theory, right? Quarry. This is where we actually look beyond the cartridge to looking for the best game load. Game is a very wide thing. Obviously we could be talking about snipe, or we could be talking about turkeys here. We've got two very different sides of things. By game, generally in this country, we mean driven partridge and pheasant, which do, surprisingly, as most people will probably disagree with me here, require a fairly similar load, to be honest. Also worries about how you get to them. If I was shooting walked up game and we're shooting birds from behind, I'd probably go for a slightly heavier load, or certainly a heavier ball size. I'd probably go upper shot size just for the extra power, because you're not going quite straight into the vitals if you are taking a purely behind shot. Maybe, possibly, however you could argue that out. Choke. Choke obviously affects pattern. Cartridge also affects pattern, but what we're looking for is the correct density of pattern to kill the bird effectively, and then the energy on target to kill the bird effectively. Choke has a lot of bearing. If you're using a lighter choke, you might actually need a heavier cartridge to get the same pattern density as a heavier choked gun. Distance. Shooting 20-yard driven partridge is very different to shooting 65-yard driven pheasant, or vice versa. A 20-yard bird will require a different load and gun setup to a 65-yard bird. And we've explored that one already. However, so the best game load essentially really has to be divided. I mean, that doesn't matter, that has a bearing, that certainly has a bearing, and WAD, most people have to use a fibre, but certainly between these three, the best game load will vary massively. However, there is some do-alls, and in fact you're almost better off using one cartridge for everything. At least you know where it shoots, how it shoots, and can gain some confidence in it. So where does that leave us? In reality, there's two loads that I like. I like them on paper, and I like them in reality. I will always buy the best quality load available because they will have the best quality shot, and I genuinely believe, not only through scientific findings and playing and shooting tons of paper and shooting ballistic jelly and shooting yellow pages and all the things I've done over the years, that better shot hits harder. The end. I generally can delete the WAD argument because I will always try and use fibre wads. I think they're better for the environment. They are better for the environment. They just make you feel a little bit better about doing what we do. And not littering the countryside is a step in the right direction to our own self-preservation. So bearing in mind that I'm using a high quality shot fibre wad, it usually is a driven grouse, which is the whole cartridge coppered shot, so you end up with a super hard shot, so you end up with less deformation but also better energy on target, more consistent patterns. 30 gram 5.5, and I've shot most of the driven grouse at paper and at game, and I found those are about the best all-rounder. Bearing in mind I shoot quite a heavy choke. The Black Gold 32 grams of 5 fibre wad is a great cartridge. It's got good quality shot, good quality components, it patterns well and has a good bit of killing ability, which is really what we're looking for here. Between those two, I think my preference would go to the driven grouse for no reason other than I think the cartridge is just that little bit prettier, and I've shot some exceptional birds over the years and think, well, they're pretty much good enough. Obviously, they're not a blanket cartridge. If you're going to go and shoot some stonking high driven birds, you're going to want to up your shot size to a 4, up from a 5 to a 4, or maybe even a 3, just so you've got the energy to carry those balls up there. What you really want is also more shots, so you're going to want to be talking about 36, 40 gram of 4 to hit home with the right density of pattern, with the right energy. In reality, guys, it's horses for courses. All of the stats we've talked about today have variables. The one thing everyone can agree with shotgun cartridges is most of it is in your head. Most of them will kill birds effectively if you put the gun in the right place. So now I've told you my favourite cartridges, the last thing I'm going to talk about is Windage and Drop. And before I go that, I should also say that I love a lot of other cartridges, but those I just have found probably the most efficient. I used to love Ely VIPs, but they seem to have changed the recipe, and I've genuinely just found they patterned a little bit less well through my gun. So there is another personal aspect. Gun. So the gun will have a lot of bearing on it, the ball ring, and you also have a huge bearing on it. But those two are obviously a given, and we've talked about it in the past. This is all my findings, by the way, guys, on this paper. It's taken me a huge amount of research to get this far. There's another pad behind you filled with notes and bits, and I still really haven't got anywhere. I was genuinely worried about releasing this video, so please don't hate on it too bad, because this is really preliminary findings. I don't really know where we are at the moment. We probably should have just released a bit where I said this is what I found so far, and with the number 4 shot, with what I'd found on a chronograph versus what I found in reality versus the perfect scenario. But I'm still not ready to put out something that's 100% ready for the world to say, this is 100% true. I've also used a few of the online shotgun ballistic calculators, some of the apps you can buy into, and they all gave me wildly different results, so I stopped believing them fairly quickly. But finally, before I finish, I'll talk about Windage and Drop. And this is in non-perfect scenarios either. This is done on the possible reality results anyway. 4 shot at 1400 feet per second. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is windage and drop, because there's something that people have spoken about or asked questions in the past. With a 10-mile-an-hour wind, 4-shot, 1400 feet per second, and this is based on the reality figures, 6 inches of windage at 50, 18 at 80, and 31 at 100. That is a lot of windage. 31 inches is what? That, I mean, 6 inches at 50, that, however, you know, at 50 yards, depending on your choke, you could be shooting a 6-foot pattern. So I suppose windage is something to bear in mind when shooting these super long range clays, perhaps, or maybe super high birds, potentially. However, again, your pattern width, really your center to center, if you can aim within that 31 inches at 100 yards and get your lead right and everything, you're doing well to then think about the wind and counter that. Drop, and this is obviously on a straight 90-degree horizontal target, 1 inch at 50, 9 inch at 80, and 16 inch at 100. The only variable that I really genuinely couldn't put in, because I'm not clever enough, was gravity. The variable of gravity on shot when shooting a straight high driven bird presumably is going to have some effect. So there you go. They're even worse once again than the figures we put on the board. Guys, thank you very much for watching and putting up with this. I'm going to carry on plugging and trying to learn and trying to figure something out, which will probably involve a chronograph and a steel plate in a field, and I'm sure you'll join me for that. But for now, thank you very much. I think I've worn out 2 board markers. Take care and goodbye.